Welcome to the Unhurried Living Podcast. My name is Alan Fadling, and I invite you to listen to leadership conversations that will help you to develop healthy rhythms of rest and work, and to live fuller in friendship with God. I hope this podcast will help you to overcome hurry and make time for what matters most. And now, enjoy today's episode. Hey friends, welcome to episode 227 of the podcast. My name's Alan, and I'm so glad you've joined me here. I'm hopeful that our time together will help you rediscover an unhurried way of life and leadership. Each week on the podcast, we have leadership conversations to help us lead better in the spirit of Jesus' unhurried way, the way of leadership that flows from a full soul instead of an empty one. Sometimes I'm talking with fellow authors, and sometimes I'm talking with leaders just like you, who are learning to live and lead at the fruitful pace of grace and peace. Today, we come to the final episode based on our book, What Does Your Soul Love? The final chapter is titled Process, Staying on the Path of Change. One of my key learnings over the years has been that to remain a person of spiritual influence in the communities where God has placed me, I must remain engaged in the transforming journey into which God has invited me. Letting myself get stuck, but then stay stuck along the way, doesn't help me or anyone else. So I'm looking forward to sharing a recent conversation I had with my friends Jeb Shore and Matt Fogle about leadership as a transforming process. I really enjoyed it, and I believe you will as well. Now, if you're a new listener, welcome to the podcast. If you find these episodes helpful, would you please follow, rate, and review? And be sure to share this podcast with your friends. Now, let's dive into my conversation with Jeb and Matt. On today's Unhurried Living podcast, I'm pleased to have a conversation with my friends Jeb Shore and Matt Fogle. Thanks so much, guys, for taking this time to talk.
Great to be here. Here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Yeah.
Well, I really have been looking forward to the chance to have this conversation with the two of you, especially really about the last chapter of the book Jim and I wrote, What Does Your Soul Love? And that chapter was titled, and it still is, in fact, titled Process, Staying on the Path of Change. So I'm just kind of curious as we start, how do you tend to respond to experiences of change, job or circumstance, especially maybe outward change? And I ask because in the book, we sort of said that Jim prefers change and I have a tendency to resist change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, it was good to think about this instead of just a quick answer for me. And so I think for me, it's like, at first, I'm optimistic. This is good. I'm excited about this because it's going to be different. So I kind of like change at a certain level. The difficult thing for me is anticipating the depth and breadth of the change. So that's one issue for me. Then secondly is, the longer I go, I tend to get more pessimistic or realistic, depending on how you define the term, as I go through the change. So for me, it's optimistic. It's great. It's going to be awesome. Then when I start to dig into the details, I'm like, oh man, oh my gosh. Okay, this is going to be a big deal. This is going to be hard. I need to really trust God through this, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the way I do it. Yeah.
Well, that's really helpful for you. I love hearing kind of how you process that, and that you, in some ways, there's an optimism, but then when the implementing, the living through it comes, some of the realism or pessimism. I like realism better, I just think that's, Jim won't give me credit for realism, but that's okay.
I was about to say most pessimists, they prefer realism. Yeah.
Yeah. Come on. I just think, see, she says I'm Eeyore, which makes her Tigger. And, there you go.
There we go.
But what about you, Matt? When you sort of what's your, gut reaction, your initial kind of response to situations of change?
Yeah. As I thought about that question, I thought if I'm making the change, I love it.
And
if somebody else is forcing that change on me, I don't love it. So
you love change that you're semi in control of.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. If I'm honest, yeah. I was reflecting just even on a church planning journey. You know, we came out here to start a church and all the unexpected change. You know, we started October of 2019. So COVID was not originally a welcomed disruption for
that
us.
Wasn't part of your church planning strategy?
No, it was not. No,
oh, man.
But, you know, I recognize when I'm not in control, it makes me angry. Like I get short, especially with the people that I'm closest with. I end up apologizing a lot. And that really comes from a place of like mixed expectation and combination with fear, like what's happening. And then that's usually the root of that anger. So that's definitely a struggle of mine.
Well, one of the words you used, which really sort of captures my own resistance to change, is the word unexpected. And then maybe that's very much in the spirit of what you just said, which is, you know, if you're in control of it or have a sense of being the initiator of it, it's not unexpected, at least. I mean, something might surprise you, but mostly you kind of have a vision of what the change might look like. And it's the other people who might experience the unexpected. But, you know, like you know, the realities of COVID and the quarantining that are now certainly 2.5 years old. And then just some of the other change of these years. It's the unexpectedness, the surprise of it, really the shock of it sometimes that really makes me uncomfortable. And I'd say sometimes angry, but I think mostly anxious. It just provokes my angst because I like settledness. You know, I became an Anglican because I like tradition. You know, I like that it's a church that's rooted in centuries of history. I like the unchanging nature of that. But anyway, I thought it'd be helpful because I think we each respond, you know, to change a little differently. I think maybe our listeners hearing different, you know, experiences that we've had would be helpful. So as we step into the content of this episode, in the passage, we shared that line where where God blesses Abraham early on, right? It's the line in Genesis 12 where he says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And so what grabs me is that, you know, God intends to bless us, maybe even lift us up in terms of our influence, but he doesn't just do it for our benefit. You know, he does it for the benefit, really, of the whole world. So I guess I wonder, as you reflect on your own leadership journey so far, what might be some of the intersections you notice between places of your transformation and your influence in a particular Christian community? Yeah.
I think for me, it's having, when I get in that space where I'm able to look at failures or mistakes or whatever, however you want to define it, and be able to see it from God's perspective, see it a bit more objectively because it's maybe not quite as fresh, and to be able to share those with the people around me is really, really helpful. I find that, you know, talking about my failures and my weakness tends to resonate a whole lot more with people than kind of going, oh, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then it grew to that, and, you know, all that stuff. Yeah. And it really provides an atmosphere of ongoing transformation for me to be reminded of those seasons when God was faithful, but it was really hard. But also it provides an atmosphere in that context of really allowing God to be God and not Jeb to be the big L leader in the conversation. And so I think those are things where it's amazing how when you share from weakness, again, not to be braggadocious or anything like that, because sometimes it can be. Sometimes it can be, this is my badge of honor, man. Isn't that awesome? When we do it from a place of contrition and humility, God really uses it. And by far more than some other stuff that I've tried to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, part of what I hear in what you're saying is when we as leaders share our lives honestly, you know, we talk about the journey we're actually on. We don't just talk about theoretical virtues and sort of preach at people to tell them they ought to practice them. But we share maybe a little of the story of our bumpy journey of coming to practice the good things of the kingdom.
Maybe to share like the leadership principle, maybe being more specific in terms of how to use it, potentially sharing a leadership principle, but then going into, and here's where it really became an issue for me when I did X, and this is a big problem. So it's not merely just, here's another story where I screwed up, but really trying to link it to some intentional leadership development or discipleship. So that's just kind of some thoughts.
Thanks, Jeb.
Sure.
How about you, Matt? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind was the diocese that you're a part of in the Anglican Church that Todd Hunter leads, which I really appreciate the name of it, C4SO, which stands for Church for the Sake of Others.
Yes.
And it's such a simple description and yet such a potent mission statement to say that we exist for the good of others. And oftentimes when I look back on my leadership journey and I view all those different moments of transformation, it often came from a place like Abraham, where you leave the familiar for the sake of others, where you, really it's, it's a lot like Jesus leaving heaven. Abraham left his native land, came to earth, and blessed us through his sacrificial love. And so I think about the pain points that it's caused, especially as you lean into spiritual formation as a whole, and you start to live and walk and work with Jesus at a different pace than everybody else. A lot of times that's not popular.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a blessing a lot of times to the people around you. It's only after you've dug that deep well that the overflow of living water starts to refresh those around you slowly over time. And so for me, I'm thinking about how much time it takes, how long this journey is, but also how sacrificial it is, that if we really want to have influence, we're going to have to leave some familiar places and we're going to have to enter into the unknown with God in his timeline.
Yeah.
That's great, man.
I appreciate that. I think, when we talk about Unhurried, I think to some years still, the temptation is to imagine, living your life as though you were on a Caribbean beach, sipping your favorite drink, listening to the waves roll in. And I would not complain about having moments like that. But at the same time, Unhurried, as you just unpacked it a bit, Matt, is also about the duration of the journey. The fact that Abraham doesn't even see the realization of this way in which his life is going to bless the whole world. It happens through those who come after him. Am I okay with God being so unhurried that maybe his influence in and through me would be beyond my human lifetime? Would I be okay with that? It's a practical question. And Jeb, your point, I've been reading some of the later writings of Soren Kierkegaard lately, and there's this one really amazing little distinction he made. He talked about the church of admirers of Jesus and the church of imitators of Jesus. Basically, he said, admirers, those are a dime a dozen. Anybody can be an admirer. To be an imitator, now you lean into some of the discomfort, even the suffering, to piggyback on what you shared, Matt. And I think that extends to this idea of if we're going to work with God, if we're going to work with Christ, it may have the shape or the tone of the cross. It may look like my leaning into that which I would probably not feel like leaning into. And so, Jeb, to your point, I'm tempted to be the kind of leader people will admire. And to do so, I will tell my happy, good, amazing stories. But I don't find people imitate that kind of leader. Or if they do, it doesn't do much good for their souls. I find that when I'm leaning into that imitation of Christ, leaning into that, actually following, not just admiring from a distance, but following up close, it's the change that produces in me that seems to have the most gracious impact on the people nearby. And so I guess just to to close up this question, this idea of working with God, it's working in the Spirit of God. Mm-hmm. It's working in the way of God. It's doing the sort of thing I'm doing in my role in such a way that Jesus himself might do it were he in the role instead. Yeah. And I think that's always a really fruitful way to think about whatever it is our ministry, our work, our job happens to be, whether it's a religious one, I'm in a church or ministry or whatever, or whether I am serving in a kingdom outpost, which is a business or an educational institution or whatever. Mm-hmm. So thanks for those thoughts. So when it comes to this idea of process and transformation, I think we have to acknowledge that all of us, at least at some time or another, end up feeling stuck. I know that especially in these last couple of years of this pandemic, it has really pressed my recovery from hurry, if to use language from the first book. And I have found myself feeling often stuck where I hadn't been getting stuck, a few years ago. And so I guess, as you think about, places where you've perhaps gotten stuck along the way, what was it that sort of helped you or contributed to your being able to get unstuck? What did God use, or who did God use to help you at times like that?
Yeah, for me, it's being around people that I can be vulnerable with, safe people that I can be vulnerable with, that may have gone through similar circumstances, but yet at the same time are aware of their own brokenness before the Lord. And that's been huge. That's been absolutely huge. I think the challenge sometimes is to determine whether I can trust that person or not. Yeah. And so I think what can end up getting more stuck is confiding in somebody and then, oh my gosh, they're not a safe person. Now I'm like 10 steps back instead of just a couple of steps back. So that can be a challenge, but I think that collaboration with people that you trust and can just download with is huge. It's just really, really valuable. Yeah.
Well, I think that's huge. It always strikes me that, God already knows what is in me. Mm. I don't always know what is in me, but when I have trusted friends with whom I can just start talking and start unpacking and bring what's in me, even maybe hidden from me, into the light, I start even seeing what's in me a little more clearly. And I see it in the light of God's grace and God's mercy. That has often been the unsticking point for me. It's moving from that isolated, hidden place to that place of being known and seen and loved and graced. So, yeah, thanks, Jeb. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, similar to Jeb, I was thinking that's so good, brother. There's often external voices for me that remind me, charge me, sometimes even correct me to keep going. Thinking of even last week, I got to go on a spiritual adventure with like 15 other guys to Iceland. Oh. And we went from place to place, and just one of the most violently beautiful places on the planet. Wow. And there were voices on that trip as I did a little devotional around the Celtic monks who landed there and influenced, this whole country. As you go town to town, there's these little churches everywhere. And there's a few guys on the trips as we would hike that pulled me aside, knew the kind of season I was going through with church planning, and just said, "Hey man, you have what it takes." And just really spoke life into me in a season where I am doubting, do I have what it takes? And so there are those external voices for me that have helped me not get stuck, but also when I am stuck, get unstuck. And then there's an internal voice as well. And I love how you guys worded it in the chapter. If I could just kind of read a little quote from that, one of my favorite quotes from the chapter, where you and Jim said, "We're not junk that needs to be radically repurposed. We are masterpieces needing to be restored. Original goodness precedes original sin." And often when I come to a remembrance of my deep identity as God's masterpiece, the original goodness that he created me in, when I hear his voice louder than the voices around me or even my own internal voice, that helps me get unstuck.
Thanks for sharing that line. It is one of my favorite, not just from the chapter, but in the book. I was so grateful for that because it does. Part of what helps us change is knowing that we're already loved before we change.
That's right.
If we think that change is required so that we can be loved, we'll just be stuck forever. I mean, because we know how weak we are. We know how easily we stumble. So I love that. And I love, too, the way you highlighted that not only, like Jeb said, when we have those trusted friends who will listen to us, but we also have those trusted friends who will speak into us, who will be voices of encouragement, who will be voices of affirmation, who will refresh our vision of who we are. Like you said, we are, in fact, made in the very image of our Creator. Mm-hmm. That's our value. That's our beauty. That's our glory, if you even want to use that language. I think right alongside what you guys have shared, I've found community is important. I found solitude often has been an important moment of refreshing my intentions of how I want to live. So in a sense, that solitude is a place where God reminds me who I am. For example, just a super practical illustration, I realized we took the month of July this last summer off. As this episode airs, it'll have been a few months ago. And I realized during that July break how much I was turning to food for reasons other than nourishing the body God's given me. I was turning to food for boredom. I was turning to food for false comfort. I was turning to food just out of habit. And it's been a lifelong issue for me. And I realized that there was just a moment in that break of a month where I realized, how do I want to relate to food? Do I want to eat gratefully? Do I want to eat awake? Or do I want to eat just to, fill a boring moment or try to sort of comfort my anxiety or my inner itch? And it's been immensely freeing to sort of have a fresh sense of intention. Food is a wonderful gift from God. And so now I would like to eat good food. I would like to eat food gratefully. I would like to eat food awake to the fact that I'm eating food and not asleep, eating food and watching, binge watching some series of shows. So that's a rather particular, kind of unstuckness, but that's the most real time one for me right now in these last, I'd say, couple of months.
And Alan, one thing, I don't know, I think you all have said it, but maybe I just need to say it to myself, because I really appreciated what Matt said in terms of a brother in Christ who knows him, values him, said what he said. And I think an important part of getting unstuck too is, who am I going to listen to? Am I going to listen to these people who know me, that are saying this stuff about me that's not healthy, good, or accurate? Or am I going to listen to brothers in Christ who are saying this about me? And most importantly, to your wonderful quote, who God thinks I am. And I think sometimes I can get stuck because I'm so focused on, why are they saying that about me? I can't believe they're saying that about me instead of, what the truth is. And I just get stuck there sometimes. So, yeah.
That's really helpful. Yeah. I mean, what will my vision of reality be and who will shape it?
Yes, who will shape it? Amen. Amen.
And that is so important. Well, toward the end of the chapter, Jem shared what she calls a posture for transformation. 3 words: open, aware, willing. I love that it's like a little journey in miniature, Open, aware, willing. So by open, we mean, do you want it? By aware, we mean, are you noticing? Are you paying attention? And by willing, we're asking, will you take action? So I'm wondering, as you maybe have had a chance to reflect on that little process, open, aware, willing, how have you experienced those postures in your own experience?
Yeah. There's several things I really appreciated about that section of the book. One was in terms of my initial optimism. There was a wonderful line that said, fear, control, pain, resistance may all get in the way. And just to realize that, just to be aware that that is going to potentially probably be a reality.
Yeah.
And just to be anticipating that, which is wonderful. The other thing that she also wrote was small, simple, and gracious.
Yeah.
That's so good. I so often want the home run, and just to be small, simple, and gracious, and just that's so good. It speaks for itself for sure. And then in terms of are you noticing, in terms of the aware, I think that was a great point of the three. I think being open and willing sometimes is clear, but the awareness is so valuable. And I think that really comes through being very intentional about prayer and very intentional about solitude. It's amazing how God can help us to be so much more aware when we're bathing a specific situation, or certainly our lives, in prayer, and have that time away to kind of get distance, like you shared earlier, Alan. That time of solitude as well is just can be so valuable for that awareness.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
I love that, Jeb. Matt, how about you? As you think of that trio, open, aware, willing.
Yeah, I immediately thought of a verse that I pray almost daily, if not just unconsciously daily. But, Psalm 119, verse 36, where it says, God, would you incline my heart to you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a pastor a long time ago say that he started his solitude or devotional times off by praying that prayer daily. And because he noticed in that time when he approaches God, that he's often doesn't even desire to be with him. And he's honest about that.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be honest about, God, I'm showing up today because there's part of me that just thinks I have to show up, but I want to show up. I want the desire. So would you would you bend my heart to you? And I found that I talk about the Psalms as a gymnasium for praying. It's a place that we can go to grow in our prayer life. We can use other people's words. Last night on my back porch, as I watched my little kids swim, I was reading the Celtic daily prayers. Mm-hmm. And I find Ted Loder's book, Guerrillas of Grace, often very helpful with these three questions. Using other people's words to stir our awareness, to stir our wants, even to bring us to a place where we're willing to do it. Because I think if the desire isn't genuine, the willingness won't follow. And we're not blessed if we just hear the word. We're blessed if we hear it and do it. And so that to me is, I think one of the most important pieces is figuring out, what do you really want? Let's be honest about that. Yeah. and approach God and ask him for what you need.
It's better to be honest with God about our lack of want than to pretend we want.
That's right.
Because pretending in prayer absolutely doesn't work. I mean, it's an automatic fail, and I don't mean to use such strong language, but I mean, me pretending in front of God is not prayer.
Yeah. But how much of transformation is hindered because we're just not honest?
Yeah. I know.
How much more breakthrough would we experience in the day-to-day moments if we just started with, this is where I'm at today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. I was going to say, I love that line from Psalm 119 and the way, your mentor sort of unpacked that image of incline. It's like, may there be sort of a slope toward you. Right now, I feel like I'm going uphill, I feel like it's the opposite of inclining my heart toward, which says that even my wanting God is an expression of grace. If I can pray a prayer like that, it means that I might need grace to work in me in such a way that I would want to draw near. Wow. That's a good thing to remember.
So true. So true.
It just keeps part of what this all is about, this transforming journey, is my vision of how much I need the help of God and how available that help is, how that just keeps growing. That there really is nothing, for example, in my leadership life where I don't need God to be generously present. There aren't any, I don't need you here, God. I got that down. I took that seminary class. I've been doing this so long. I know exactly what I'm doing. There aren't any of those places in our working with God because God's always there and I always need him. And that's good news. It just is. Well, I'm so glad to have the chance for the three of us to share our experiences, our reflections, our thoughts. I'm hoping that our listeners will have benefited too from this. And my hope is that, maybe you'll go back and read that chapter in What Does Your Soul Love? You may find something in it that is, shines a light on where you find yourself now. But with that all in mind, today my guests have been Jeb and Matt, and we've been talking about leadership as a transforming process. Guys, thanks so much for joining me in this.
Great to be with you all.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. In the next few episodes, we'll be talking with authors Trevor Hudson, Steve Macchia, and Andrew Arndt. I'll also be talking about a daily practice I've engaged for a while now that helps me deepen my sense of working with God day by day. I can't wait to share those episodes with you. Now, if you'd like to receive more help from Unhurried Living, I invite you to join our Unhurried daily email list. For 40 days, we'll send you a brief daily email that offers personal reflections from life and Scripture to help you take the next step in following Jesus' unhurried way. You can sign up on our website at unhurriedliving.com. We are honored to encourage thousands of leaders just like you. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Unhurried Living podcast. Join me next time to learn more about following the genius of Jesus' unhurried way of life and leadership.